Yeah, just for everybody's edification, the board, that's myself. Gene is VP, and in fact, today we were fighting over who's going to be doing the introductions.
Yes.
Gene, I want to tilt your camera up a bit.
Yes.
Lori, our treasurer, will not be joining us today. She had some other engagements. I'm not sure if Mark has joined us. Maybe he has, maybe he will. I definitely saw Joe, our director of membership. Jake is absent right now. Stephen is our webmaster and the ISC2 Seattle host. So if you have any questions, concerns, please shoot one of us a note. And then Mario, who will be on the floor tomorrow at the event, which I mentioned just a second ago. So I do want to thank our sponsors, Calver, who has been our featured sponsor. BlackBerry, IOActive, and Cybereason have all stepped up and owned some sponsorship. And I know we're going to be announcing a couple of new sponsors here, I think, for the next month. Now, I saw in the chat is in-person meeting, and I didn't want to actually address that. So one in-person meeting is tomorrow. You're all more than welcome to join the Cybersecurity Summit in Seattle. As I mentioned, I'll be there. You can hunt me down, buy me a coffee, or I'll buy you a coffee, whichever. There's, I think, an after event. I think I'm starting at like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. There's basically a happy hour, so I plan to stick it out for that, even though it is downtown Seattle. And right now, I don't think there's a lot going on down there. So anybody interested in that and want to call me out, please do. More importantly, I did want to call out and I just want to make sure I have Trey's slide up here, that we will be doing in person. Right now, our anticipation is that next month we'll do one more virtual, and then the following month we'll be doing in person. And interestingly enough, it's not that we don't want to have an in-person meeting, it's just purely about logistics. We suffer the same problem that I think every other organizer does, is that now we have to find a place, we have to make sure that we have funding, and we have everything set up. So to, again, a point of our sponsors. And
I'd like to add, you get 6 or 7 free CPEs by attending, either virtually or in person.
And absolutely, so attend, you get CPEs. Now, one of the other things too is that when you signed up for this event today, if you went ahead and gave us your ISC2 number, we will be providing you the CPEs. We record those on your behalf. That said, now I'm going to hand it over to Gene to introduce Trey, because I think that's the only appropriate way of doing this.
Trey. Trey's been a good friend of our chapter for many a year. He's helped start this chapter, as a matter of fact. And Trey is well known in the security industry for being involved in so many different aspects of security. I mean, I can't think of a corner that he hasn't put his nose in and can give you an expert bit of opinion and good works on any moment of the day or night. So whenever I have an issue I can't figure it out, I call Trey. Lucky Trey. Trey today is going to be giving us a talk on deepfakes, voice cloning, and all kinds of other interesting fraudulent activities. Trey right now is a CISO of a company called Conegra, I think it's called.
Cognera.
Cognera, sorry. So I'm bad with some of these names. And it's a great pleasure that, I introduced Trey to this chapter, and Trey, take it away.
Okay. Oh, I have to say, Trey, didn't you like the way my slide just kind of bled into your slide so nicely?
Yeah. Nice.
All right. Cool.
So in today's talk, I'm going to go through a couple of different things. I'm going to skip all the background material because I think everybody here has probably heard of deepfakes. It's been around for years. We've probably all seen fun internet videos. I will get talking a little bit deeper about voice cloning, but synthetic identities is really one of the main things of this talk. So I'm going to do a larger discussion around that and how companies need to respond. So this is geared more towards security professionals than a general audience. So that said, it's going to be a slightly different format than my usual talks because it's going to be a little bit more on the discussion side. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides, I haven't posted them yet because I just updated them, but I'm going to put them out there. There are a couple of other links out there, including some links for deepfake resources. And then I actually have a set of resources for if you're tracking indicators of compromise for Ukraine, Russia kind of thing, or also from that link, there's also information about ransomware that might be useful as well. And I'll show that link again at the end of the slides. And I should have the deck updated probably 30 minutes after this meeting ends. So with that, I'm going to start diving into deepfakes. Now, one thing the reason that kind of brought me to wanting to talk about this is the University College of London recently talked about a report that went out in Crime Science Journal. And the thing that they said was that deep fakes are the most dangerous crime of the future right now, which when you think about, that's a pretty heavy duty thing to say. But I also started thinking about the fact that on most corporate risk profiles, deep fakes is not on there. So, if you think about it, like a lot of people are worried about ransomware right now because we see ransomware taking out millions of dollars here, millions of dollars there. But we're not really prepared for the amount of deep fake stuff that's going on and voice cloning attacks that are already happening. So I think it's important to kind of understand that this has already been weaponized and is already impacting companies now so that we can get it on those risk dashboards. Now, this report on the left actually goes into a lot of different types of AI-enabled crime. In this is one of the charts from that report. And the biggest point is on the right. For deep fakes, the level of harm, the level of profit, the level of achievability, and the hardness of like defeatability of it is really high, which means that this is a very easy type of attack, and it's extremely hard to defend from. Once these kind of things are out, it just brings up a lot of questions. A lot of people's minds will get converted to whatever it was they saw. And in a lot of cases, you'll never get those people's minds back, even if facts come out later in time. So it's very interesting. Now, that report is also useful because they go into military robots and other things. I think that there are a lot of other types of AI attacks that they didn't bring up, but it's a good paper in general. It's worth checking out. Now, they also went through and classified these in a couple of different ways. And then with this, again, you'll see this harder to defeat and then high harm or profit. In that top right corner, you see that audio video impersonation. And again, if you've got like the general internet context, or you're used to seeing things like YouTube videos or TikToks or whatever, where people are doing deep fakes, you think, well, these are funny and they're fairly harmless. But there is a very distinct dark side to them as well. One other thing that I want to mention also is there are hundreds of free software options for how to create these, not just deep fakes, but also voice cloning. There's a wide variety of mixtures of a scale of easy to use versus how believable is it as a deep fake. And then part of that also gets into processing time. So if they're willing to spend a little bit more time, they can make these things look just perfect. You will not know that that was not the actual person doing that. Whereas a lot of the ones from the apps, you can tell that it's like somebody's face imposed on some music video or whatever it is. So there's a wide range of quality, and the ability to do these really high quality ones has been around for a while, but the level of knowledge you need to do this has dropped from something that would have taken a college researcher down to like 13 and 14-year-old kids. So it's definitely the tools, the technology has become very widespread, and it's very, very easy to use. We have seen some interesting cases. Now, this isn't the type of election concern that most people have. Like a lot of times people think of, if a deep fake is used in an election, it's to put out really bad information about one of the candidates. This one was a little bit different. This guy basically lived in an area where there were people who spoke 20 different languages, and he just leveraged deep fakes to basically put the same video in all 20 different languages so he could speak to a much larger voter base and get more votes. And this is a very effective tactic. Now, he got in trouble a little bit because people realized, like, you don't actually speak all 20 languages. A lot of people realized that, like, he doesn't speak my language, and people called him on it and stuff. And this ended up kind of blowing up a little bit. But it is interesting from the fact that we are already seeing deep fakes used in elections. We're also seeing it in a lot of other places. We're seeing deepfake sex extortion scams on the rise. And this is frequently, we're seeing this with a lot of Instagram cases where somebody will follow somebody on Instagram, grab a lot of photos of that person, then they'll mix them into some type of porn video or something, and then basically say like, hey, I'm going to tell your whole family, or I'm going to post this publicly if you don't pay me. And those tend to be generally for lower stakes amounts of money, but there are also some problems where these people can persistently keep coming back to that same victim and say, we want more money. 6 months later, they're hitting you up again and they've got a worse video and stuff. Now, this particular type of attack could also make certain groups of people, be it politicians or people who are famous actors or actresses and stuff like that, where their publicity issue is a larger factor of their career. For those people, the payout might be much larger. So this is something that's on the rise. It's really important to kind of let people know that these exist, and that, some of these, like, especially with the internet celebrities, where it's like they've kind of pulled up on their bootstraps. They don't have a team of people to protect them per se. They can fall victim to these things very quickly. Again, because the software is free, it's easy to use. This type of thing is increasing in nature of what we see out there. The other thing, and this is just very relevant to today's world, so to speak, is the use of deep fakes in war. Now, one of the problems is it's really hard to tell how much of the media we get out of an enclosed area. In this particular case, I'll say Ukraine, but it could be anywhere, and it's very tricky to figure out, like, what is necessarily the reason somebody is trying to persuade an audience to do something. Now, in the case of war, this is huge because, you could persuade other countries to provide you with more ammunition. You could persuade, the enemy to not invade, or you could try to persuade the enemy to give up, or any number of different things. So this is a huge area. Now, in talking about this, I want to say that disinformation campaigns have been around for probably hundreds of years, but definitely at least since like the 1960s. So disinformation has been around for a very long time. Technically, you could probably even say it's probably been around for thousands of years. I mean, some of the Sun 2 type stuff speaks to that as well. But the use of deep fakes in it makes it a lot more believable. And that ends up creating some other dynamics because it can scale. Now, part of this is tied to things like social media. If we didn't have social media and these videos couldn't spread so well, it wouldn't make such a big difference. But the combination of deepfake videos with social media spreading like wildfire, when kind of an uncontrolled burn, so to speak, makes these particularly effective. And that's kind of a dangerous thing. Now, one thing I've got a screenshot of is the one of the websites from the Russian government that had pushed on one of their websites, where they pre-released a web page showing the victory in Ukraine. And this is just an example of disinformation. That one is not particularly a deep fake. But I just wanted to show you something that's irrelevant. Like, this is actually kind of happening now with this disinformation. And so if you start thinking about the fact that, these governments that are attacking each other, these militaries that are attacking each other, they definitely have been well prepared, and they have teams of people doing these disinformation campaigns already. So given they have teams of people, they're throwing lots of money at it. Is there any reason they wouldn't be using free software for deepfakes to start creating deepfakes to persuade people? So, and this gets tricky. Another thing that I'll also mention about this is a few of these have been posted, notably to Twitter and Facebook, and both of those companies were very responsible at shutting them down as quickly as they could. But some of the information from that bled over into other online forums, Reddit and stuff like that. And a lot of people started picking them apart, and they did some really interesting things where they realized, like, if you had an explosion next to a Jeep, the glass from the Jeep wouldn't have blown towards the explosion. You'll see these like things that, like, people are picking it apart and they're like, yeah, that's absolutely not what that looks like. This just looks like somebody poured gas on a vehicle and lit it. And so you kind of get to see the public trying to do amateur armchair forensics of what it is to determine whether it's a fake, but that doesn't stop the fake from spreading across social media. So lots of other people that don't necessarily have scientific knowledge or don't have experience with seeing explosives wouldn't have any idea that that wasn't real. So it's kind of an interesting problem. The other thing that I've got on there is there's a famous North Korean one, and they've got some ones out there where he's doing music videos and all sorts of stuff. And we've seen that with Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden and stuff as well. So, I mean, there's deep fakes in one level for political figures is extremely common. But there is some danger in that the level of potential danger, if you were to see something that's were to, let's say, look like a very shady dealing between world leaders, or world leaders announcing that they're going to nuke another country, or world leaders saying something, whatever, horrible. The videos themselves suddenly end up having a value that, one, it's harder to obtain, but it's like they can spread like wildfire on changing people's opinions. And if it were in an election event and somebody were to put, a really horrible video out that makes somebody look particularly scammy or whatever, that can sway elections for things like independent voters or get other people to not show up to the vote. So these are huge issues. DARPA put out an $85 million challenge to try to come up with software to detect these. And although humans can detect it slowly, it takes time. It's not something we can do quickly. And we don't currently have good solutions for a lot of these deepfake problems. And these same solutions to identify them don't exist for companies like Twitter and Facebook and Reddit and stuff like that yet. So right now, the attackers have a very distinct advantage when it comes to these types of deepfakes. And that brings me to one of my main points. The security economics of deepfakes is one of the reasons these are so dangerous. The attackers have this massive asymmetric advantage over the defenders because this costs nothing to do. It's just a little bit of time, some free software. The cost to detect it and the cost to detect it at scale, because if you're running a large platform like Facebook, you need to be able to detect it off of billions of images or billions of videos being uploaded, is an extremely high cost. Right now, we don't even have solutions for that completely. There are companies working on this problem, and as I said, various governments, not just the US, China is working on this as well. But the US has put out a DARPA challenge to try to get people to solve this, and it's currently an unsolved problem. So this problem we're seeing with these is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So that's a little bit of background on deepfakes. And with that, I'm going to jump into the voice cloning. Now, I think it was the beginning of last year, possibly a year before, depending on when I did this, but I did do a discussion that's still on Como's website about voice cloning. And on that one, I ended up using some software to clone one of the news anchors' voices. And with that, it was kind of interesting because I can get it to work, but I did run into some weird problems, like you can't say things like pizza. So pizza is one of these words that when you try to type it in, the tools will make somebody say pizza or something like that. It doesn't come out quite right. There's tricks. You can spell it like P-I-T-S-A. You can do these different things, adding in a different set of vowels to get words to work. But ultimately, the software I used to do that took a little bit of, playing with. The neat thing about that software is I only needed 5 seconds of somebody's voice. And I can get that from most people's outbound voice messages. So if I call at like 4 a.m. and you're asleep and not answering, I can just record that outgoing voice message and use that to clone your voice. That's all it takes. Now, when you have YouTube videos, especially if it's a politician, somebody who's public, super easy to get massively large samples of the voice. And if you get anything larger than that, it's going to get even better at mirroring that voice pattern perfectly. Now, this was back then. Already now, we've got real-time voice cloning that is almost perfect. It's way better than the software I used for that video segment on Como News. And with those, people are literally putting in microphones, and some of them are doing things where it's like they get into live chats and then they'll mix it with a combination of an animated character. They'll have an avatar. In some cases, they're mixing it with deepfakes. So there's a deepfake where it looks like it's the president or it looks like it's this famous actress, and that person can talk in real time, and it converts it to that person's voice pattern, and it comes out sounding just like them. So, the technology is there right now. It's there and it's free. Now, some of these real-time voice cloning ones have other dangers. And that kind of brings up my next point. That real-time stuff was used in this example of where somebody did a $35 million theft by using voice cloning, and they had money wire transferred. Now, this isn't the only case like this. We've had a couple of different cases like this before this one happened, and it's increasing in the number of attempts people have been making to do this. So this is something that all of our organizations need to be prepared for, that just because you're hearing on your phone that the CEO is calling the CFO or is calling somebody, with your finance group, that might not actually be the person you're thinking it is. So it's really, really important that you have some types of systems in place to challenge that person to make sure that it really is this person. Another trick that a lot of these attackers are using that's kind of interesting is they're watching people's schedules. So if they see like this person's going to be flying because they have to speak at a conference on the other side of the country or in another country, they're watching for when that person's going to be in an airport. And one of the things that they can do is they can get airport background noises. You can also get like rainy day background noises. So it sounds like you're in a car and there's windshield wipers going, there's a lot of rain. That additional noise in the background, or it could sound like it's an office with a lot of background noise, like lots of people typing, stuff like that. Those aspects of basically flaws in the audio quality, they mask a lot of the problems where you might have little bitty issues that where a human ear that's trained to detect this might pick up like, that doesn't sound like the way this person says that word normally. But when you start amplifying all this airport noises, car noises, whatever it is, it makes it much, much, much harder and much more believable that this is the person you're talking to. Because if you know that person's about to get on a flight and they're calling you from the airport and you hear the airport stuff in the background and you're talking to them and it's kind of a rough connection, it's even more believable, which is really, really horrible about these things. So the attackers are well aware of how this stuff works, and they're using it, and they're getting millions of dollars out of companies right now. So, oops, for some reason I can't slide to the next slide. Okay. And the next thing I wanted to bring up was extortion. So with voice cloning, there's a lot of different types of extortion that can happen. And one of the ones is, extorting somebody by basically making it sound like they have voice cloned calls of them talking to a lover, and maybe in that conversation, that person talks about their spouse, and it's like, oh, my spouse doesn't know she's at work, or whatever it is, to make fake voices so that they can really cause problems or havoc and try to extort somebody. And the same thing again with politicians, just like I mentioned with deepfakes, somebody can create something that sounds like a really shady deal, make it sound like it's present relative to a current election cycle or a current whatever crisis. There's things you can do that can suddenly make these calls sound extremely believable. One of my biggest fears is that these kind of things are going to end up getting used in court and convince a judge that the person also did the really shady thing that they probably didn't do at all. And that this is actually going to create some really interesting problems with the court system as these kind of start going into it. But there's a lot of other stuff with extortion. One other thing that we've had happen recently as well is people voice clone. I think it was a YouTuber or like a YouTube personality, and this girl went hiking and she went out to a place where, the phone signal was bad, and somebody called her parents and basically said that they had captured her and that they were going to kill her if they didn't wire money. And the parents couldn't reach the daughter in that particular time, so they ended up having to start going through the process of wiring money. But the attackers were able to play what sounded just like, the daughter going, help me, and calling for all this stuff. So, it can be a very heart-wrenching experience to hear this voice with the voice pattern of somebody that sounds perfect, that's in a lot of pain or whatnot. So, there's a lot of different ways that this extortion stuff can happen and play out. And so I just wanted to bring that up as like one specific thing. One thing I've been worried about for a while is there's been and this is old, like part of this is old, not the voice cloning piece, but at least 10 years ago, when voice over IP started getting cheap, people started hiring call centers in other countries and basically saying, here's an entire phone book of numbers. I want you to call all of them, and here's your script. The call center may not have done anything illegal, not knowing. But somebody hired that call center to say, you're going to act like it's a church. We're going to act like Billy Bob got burned and we need money for a hospital. And we want them to donate money. And this is the place you donate it to, or you start taking their credit card, you start getting their money, their check account, whatever it is. In that particular type of fraud, the call center itself doesn't know they weren't hired by a church or whatever group it was. So you've got like hundreds of people calling every phone number in the state, typically preying on elderly people that, can't hear well or something. And they think, oh, this is my church calling me about such and such. And then that story of like the kid got burned and that, the hospital won't take care of him and stuff. It's like they can really start wrenching the people's hearts out to try to get pressure on them to get them to give up information that they want, to basically monetize it. Now add that to voice cloning, and you can have voice cloning where it's like the actual person from that church. It can be like that pastor, or it could be like somebody that person knows, or something that you see as a potential LinkedIn connection or a potential Facebook friend or something like that. They can start leveraging additional information or using things where it's like, I need a Southern accent. I'm attacking people in Georgia or Alabama, and it has to have a Southern accent. So I can start using that kind of a voice when I'm doing these types of attacks or something like that. So this is going to make those types of attacks much more effective and much worse. And it's something that's also even harder to defend from, because like with the traditional ones, you might have had a foreign accent, or the person might have just sounded like, this doesn't sound like somebody I know. But when the person's calling and it's a voice that's very familiar, or it's a voice that sounds very trusting, it's going to have a higher effective rate on that. So, this kind of thing is going to be bad. Another aspect is pretexting. And I love this idea for red teaming, and I hate this idea from attackers. But, a lot of us, have to have a sleep function on our phones so we don't get calls at 4 a.m. A lot of us have 2 cell phones, or we have some other mechanism for dealing with, calls we want to wake us up and calls we don't. So if it's coming from an unknown number, it's almost always going to go to voicemail. And one of the things that you could do against IT people is basically pretext a voice where you could take like a sample of, let's say it's a CFO and she's somebody who has a YouTube video or some way that I've captured that person's voice. And now I'm going to leave an urgent voicemail for this IT person to call me the second that they wake up because I need to get my password changed or whatever it is and stuff like that. This is going to be much, much more effective with spear phishing, because basically when the person wakes up and they listen to this voicemail, they're going to be like, oh, okay, it's this person who I work with, or I work with them, but they're from a different office, because the attacker found that from LinkedIn, and they need X, Y, and Z. And then when you spear phish it with a lookalike domain, that emails in their inbox, and like, this is the email that matches the voicemail I got, which I've already confirmed because I heard them. And it did sound like the person that I was expecting it to sound like. So that's going to increase, the gullibility of the IT workers when this type of stuff happens. And this is also increasing the value of hacked voicemail and a variety of audio samples. And I think, no, I don't have it on the slide. The one thing that I also wanted to mention is some of the robocallers, I might have it later in here, but some of the robocallers have been doing something where they call like every single phone number in the United States or every single phone number in a variety of countries. And one of the things that they do is they record every voice of every person that answers, or they record all the outbound voice messages. And they've started selling these types of databases where you can get voice print databases matched to cell phones, voice print databases matched to all sorts of things. And those databases are getting sold and eventually falling into the hands of attackers, so that there's already these large sets of data about you. that also is matched to addresses and phone numbers and so forth. So that problem is going to get worse as time goes on. Now, this is one of the main things that I wanted to talk about is synthetic identities. So there's a concept of synthetic identity fraud that has been around in the financial area for a while. And that terminology is typically referring to somebody who's taking some real data, like a real address, a real social security number, and some fake data, and merging the two, and then doing transactions where the transaction, like they're setting up a new account, the transaction gets set up because of the real data, but then they're wiring the money to the data that's connected to the fake account, or they're doing things to get credit and then they're increasing their credit levels and so forth. So there is this concept of synthetic identity fraud that has already existed for a few years. There are talks on YouTube from the FTC about this, lots of banks. It's a huge problem in the industry. What I want to talk about has a lot of overlap. It's general same kind of idea, but it's just synthetic identities by themselves. So not necessarily for financial gain, but it might be because I'm going to create a Twitter account or a Facebook account because later I want to start using my deepfake videos, and this is going to look like a fake human. So it's, there's some overlap on these terms, but they're not exactly the same. So in both of those cases, the age of the synthetic identity increases the value. And one of the things that's going on right now is advanced persistent threat attackers and nation state attackers from all over the world are going onto large social media platforms in every country in the world. And they're setting up identities, and they're, doing small little posts every now and then. And they've built these large automated systems to go create thousands of accounts. And there's places you can go buy thousands of accounts. I want to go buy 1,000 Twitter accounts, and I want to bring that into my infrastructure for attack or for disseminating bad information. And these are the same type of things that are frequently used in those disinformation campaigns that I talked about on that slide about war. So you have to have these little hooks into the infrastructure and start making connections so that those become useful. And over time, the longer that those are there, the better they are, because if somebody logs on, creates a Twitter account, and shoots something bad out in like 30 seconds, it's very easy to detect. What's much harder to detect is that account has made 100% valid postings for 5 years and is on a network of 2,000 other people. This one looks like a real person. And from, somebody trying to use a quick algorithm to defeat an attacker that's putting out a lot of misinformation, it becomes more valuable for the attacker. And that account is worth a lot more because it can get away from some of these metrics, some of these algorithms. Similarly, but in a different sense, your credit score can be increased in a variety of different ways, especially if you're in poor countries where they don't have a lot of formal systems for doing credit. But, if they look at the age of account is a big indicator. If you've had an account in good standing, even if it's only 20 cents in it, but it's been in good standing for 10 years, the algorithms that are used to grant you more credit or do other things will grant you better ratings because, you've had a great account and, it was in good favor for that long. So all of the attackers are setting these up now, and our defenders are not always necessarily looking for these now. And that's one of the big things that you need to know about. The other thing is, in certain industries, if you are in the finance industry in the United States, we have these things called know your customer laws. If you have to know your customers, you have to abide by these know your customer laws, but it turns out you've got 10,000 fake accounts in your system, and that gets discovered later. No, you didn't really know your customers. And one of the problems with that is, for certain businesses, the way they authenticate customers and the way that they're basically granting customers access to the system or access to other financial systems to do trading or any number of things, those are gameable. And these attackers know that these are gameable, and they know where the little edges are, and they're sliding under and creating lots of accounts into these things. Another thing that attackers are doing is The second a new social media platform happens, or a new shopping platform. So these are also used in places like Amazon for fake ratings. So you'll see this used again and again and again for a variety of different things. So, I need an army of machines that are going to do fake posting reviews, and I'm going to end up creating a machine learning thing that I've fed it 500,000 book reviews, and it's now going to write fake book reviews, and every one of them is going to be different. So attackers are using these across a very wide range of systems. But one thing that's been happening is in things like gaming platforms. We may have a gaming platform where the games at first are dealing with fake money, and it's like not a really big concern, but then these guys are already creating these hundreds of accounts. Down the road, the game starts introducing real money, or its money is backed up by Bitcoin, or has some aspect of NFTs or some value that can be traded. Then you start doing more know your customer stuff, but you can't delete the 10,000 customers that are already there. And so all these companies that weren't collecting the correct data up front are suddenly caught where they're like, well, we don't want to lose all the customers, but from this point forward, we're going to collect the data correctly. And realistically, no matter what your business is, you should have been collecting that data up front. And that's one of the big gaps that a lot of companies are making. And that's why I've got a really strong recommendation, is that almost every organization needs to change the data that's collected around account creation, and then also account behavior. In this, I threw a couple on here. There's a lot of other things, and some of these vary depending on the industry you're in, or whether you're running a website or an API, or what kind of business you're in. But things like the account creation source IP address is really important. And then comparing that, and this, I wrote this a specific way, to the IP address of an active Tor address at that creation date. Because this is the reason I say that. I might have an IP address that I'm going to pop up with Tor, create thousands of accounts, shut it down, never use Tor again from that IP address. So when you start looking at these Tor addresses, it's not one you need to worry about. So capturing that from a copy of the Tor IPs and comparing them when the account was created, not 3 years later, is very, very useful. Same thing, figuring out the BGP ASNs at the creation date. And the reason I say that at the creation date is sometimes they change. Sometimes, some of these IPs get bought by another company, or some company that owns them in 2 or 3 countries decides to move a range of IPs because they need them more in the US than they needed them in Guatemala or wherever it was. And sometimes these IPs move around. So that kind of information is useful. You can take it a step further and get into geolocation. You can say, like, what part of a city was the person in? Maybe this is for a small school, or it's in one county, and you're saying, like, I want to make sure the IP address that hit me was in the same county and not on the other side of the country when they did this. So again, lots of other ways that this can be done. I just want to give you some examples. The other one, and I think this is a really important one, is the web browser fingerprinting, and not just using the user agent string. Now, to start with, most companies aren't keeping the user agent string. So like, if you just start doing that, that's a big, gap from where you were. And the reason I say that is because a lot of these automated systems are using bots, and it'll show up as like curl or something like that, or it'll show up as they're faking an old version of Mozilla, or they're faking an old version of Internet Explorer, but they're always faking the same one because they don't like rechanging their infrastructure. So these kind of things are helpful. But if you have additional information with this additional web browser fingerprinting, then even if they did the correct, like, this is an up-to-date version of Chrome that hit us, and it looks like they're on Windows and they've got this, that, and the other, that fingerprinting is going to give away whether it's the same one running all 10,000 accounts, or these are 10,000 different people. Time from account creation to key activity. What I mean by this is, if I create an account, set up a picture, fill out an entire profile, and connect to 5 other people in less than half a second, I'm not a human. And people aren't recording those times to tell the difference between, was that a bot or was that a human? Now, attackers will eventually figure this out and, adjust to, match. And they'll be like, okay, I need to, when I create an account, I have to wait, 42 seconds before I post a picture. And then I got to wait, X many seconds. But for right now, They're not doing that. They've got all these automated bots, and they want them to run as fast as they can, create 5,000 accounts. Some of them are using things like Tor so that it looks like each one's coming from a different IP address. But what's actually happening when they hit your site definitely looks like a bot. It's like, in second, boom, everything was done. And they've really customized that stuff to your, business, basically. And then again, ongoing activity of frequency. Do you have these things where it's 1,000 posts all come in Sunday at 4 a.m. from whatever address, and all these people do a benign posting, and then they don't do anything for a month, and then a month later all of them do one posting? You can start to see patterns that some of these bots have for a while when they're keeping an account alive. And again, if you don't have this data, you can't do anything with this, because then you're just like, all I know is their username, and that's it. And I've got maybe the creation date. But this information is going to be extremely useful for combating deepfakes, combating these type of synthetic identities in machine learning tools that we're probably going to have in the future. The problem we're going to end up having is when you deploy those tools is not the time to have started the collection of this data. And that's one of my biggest warnings about these synthetic identities is your organization needs to be collecting this data now. And again, I could talk about this all day. They're fun topics, but these are things that are going on now that I don't see companies typically defending themselves for. They aren't typically getting ready for this, yet the crimes are occurring. And the other thing is we need to think about the future combinations of these technologies. So simjacking and deepfakes is worse than just simjacking or deepfakes, because maybe I get to post something from your phone, or I get to post it, using your app, or something like that. There's a lot of different things that can cause unique problems. Or maybe I'm sending a text message from your phone that, incidentally goes to the board, or instantly goes to your spouse, or whatever it is. And it comes from that, actual phone. It's there. And, if somebody gets your phone later, they can see, yeah, it was sent by you, those kind of things are going to create a lot of other interesting problems. So all I'm saying here is don't think of deepfakes or voice cloning by themselves. Think of them in conjunction with other types of attacks, and how that amplification of the combination is going to make things a lot worse in the future. The other thing is there's a lot of companies that are using publicly available data for authentication. And the examples of this are like in China, they've got one where you smile. Well, it's not just in China, it's in a lot of places where they smile. Some of the first ones that came around, they would smile, and they were basically looking at the shape of your mouth and the muscle changes and stuff. And they were using that for authentication at even like ATMs. So you would smile at the ATM and it'd give you the money. Deep fakes can totally redo smiles. And especially if there's video of you smiling, I've probably done it 100 times on this talk. If there's videos like that out there of you, they can grab it. Now, there's a new type of this smiling thing where what they're doing is they're looking at the ridgeline of your teeth. And so, because your teeth are less likely to change, and not everybody's teeth are flat and perfect. And so what they're doing is they're basically figuring out, like, this is the shape of this person's teeth, and they're authenticating based on this public image of your teeth. And there's other ones, there's ones where they're doing selfie authentication. There's a lot of these different types of things. But my point on here is this: your face and your voice aren't yours. They're public. And a lot of people don't think about that. But like, if there's a picture on your LinkedIn profile of you, that picture of you is public. And that means that anybody else taking that picture and doing a deep fake with it, or somebody taking a YouTube video or TikTok video or whatever it is, or a sample of your voice, that's public information. And that breaks certain things. And the people who are building some of these authentication schemes, although it can be useful as a secondary or third, thing, the fact that you're taking something that you have publicly put all over the internet, or somebody else has publicly put it all over the internet, and you're treating that that's private, is a flaw. And if we think of the phrase of something you have and something you know, we think of that something you have. What these companies have done is they said, well, you have a face, And they thought, well, that's something you have, and then something might be a passcode. But realistically, and they think of like a username and password, your face should be the username, not the password, because it's public. It's like everybody can see that. What that phrase should have been is something you privately have and something you privately know. And if you do it that way, you don't run into this problem with these authentication systems. Likewise, these companies that are collecting these faces, or a variety of different biometrics, have this problem. These biometric systems and these photo databases, and just people scraping things like Facebook, there's tons of databases you can download right now that are just like, here's thousands of faces, and I think the Russian troops just had this, they basically got doxxed this week by the Ukrainian army and that stuff, or no, it was by Anonymous, sorry. Anonymous did that and made that public. So, I mean, this kind of thing is already, sensitive. Attackers know that this is sensitive and they're using it against people. But this is going to become a bigger problem in the future. Deep fakes and voice cloning are destroying these types of authentication models, and we shouldn't be using them. I mean, we really should keep in mind that these, I mean, it's counterintuitive to think your face and voice is not yours. We always think that's like my voice, my face and stuff. But realistically, in today's age, it's public. If I can go to LinkedIn, I can get a picture of you, or if I can go to Facebook or whatever it is and get a picture of you, that image of you is public. But we haven't been treating it that way. Again, APT groups have been collecting databases. I've mentioned this before, robocalls or selling voice samples. And we're seeing some of this stuff happen. I talked about this a little bit already, but if you think about it, I mean, some of it's self-evident. Deep fakes could easily be used to persuade different groups to think different things. And that could be contradicting a scientific fact. It could be, saying a political guy is a horrible guy. It could be anything. So there's any number of ways that these could be used. A similar one, you could have something that looks like just horrid atrocities, just to persuade emotional, terror in a group or whatever it is. I mean, there's so many different things, and they are free and easy to create. So one other thing that I wanted to mention, this is kind of a little side conversation. A problem that they started running into was people doing something that was like deep fakes, but they were taking two different people's images. So it was like a real person and a fake person, or two different real people. It's like the person who's the victim and the person who's the attacker, and they merge them enough so that the optical systems will pick it up enough that they could verify either one of those people to be that person. And this happened to be done on some passports. So basically, two different people could use those passports. And this is done by people mailing in the photo. This is like, these are my two passport photos of my application. Some of these started getting caught, but it's definitely a real problem. And again, we don't always have software to detect this. So this is something that's going to be increasingly a problem as we go forward with use of images and voice. Now, all this said, we have a much larger problem coming down the pipe, and that's weaponization of artificial intelligence across everywhere we're using it. AI is wonderful for all sorts of things, but it's got this problem where it basically creates huge amounts of technical debt, because it's great at this like Pareto level. It's like, I'll get 80% of that done perfect at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I can't do anything about that other 20% or that other 10%. And we end up creating a lot of tools that are very powerful and very useful. But even in the security realm, people aren't paying attention to what is that 10% that it can't do. And what ends up happening is we don't build defense in depth so that we can use the primary tool to chew off 90% of the problem, but then we have to have a second defensive tool to take care of that other 10%, or in certain cases, that other 10% is just a lot harder, and we have to have some other process to deal with it. One thing I want to just set in everybody's mind is every single place you see AI end up being used, you need to start thinking about how it could be abused as well. Like, what is the system to attack this? What is, the thing where this goes sideways? And a lot of these uses are really, really simple and straightforward. In certain cases, like the attack situation is something that's not likely right now, but it's something you want to pay attention to. And you just want to embed in yourself an automatic process of, if I ever see an AI tool in my business, I need to think if it can be weaponized and what that weaponization looks like. And again, I've kind of talked about a lot of these things. There are AI-assisted stalking tools, content forgery, fake news. People can go after the stock markets. We've talked about simulated kidnapping. And there's all sorts of stuff. AI is getting a little crazy, and the attackers are taking advantage of it. The biggest thing, again, though, is the attackers have that asymmetric advantage. It is much, much, much harder for us to defend from these types of attacks than it is for them to generate these. My specific recommendations, and again, these would have to be custom for every different company and every different business type, but do have a plan to respond to deepfakes in your business. You may need to draft communication responses. And what that is that's like getting your HR and legal team to approve that we can send this live if this weird thing were to happen. This is especially important for publicly traded companies. It's especially also important, for a lot of nonprofits, for political groups, stuff like that. Anything where that image could be tarnished or that image is likely to be tarnished, you need to already have a plan in place. Now, that's just talking about, like, if your CEO had this happen, you could have, depending on the type of business, things on your platform or things in your marketplace. And again, your business is going to vary. You want to go ahead and get these plans thought out and like how you're going to triage them and what your communication is, so that when it hits you, you don't just start thinking about it and for the first time call the attorneys and then have to explain what a deepfake is, or call, your HR. You don't want to do all that stuff after the fact. You need to get prepared for this stuff now. And again, we're seeing people get victimized by this. We're seeing, like I said, that voice cloning taking $35 million out of a company. You need to be training your teams that these voice cloning and deepfake problems are an issue and putting things in place. Now, from an internal standpoint, you can have verbal checks and like you can say, like, what was the last joke I told you? What was this, that, or the other? There are things you can do that will break the cycle of voice cloning or break what that deep fake might do. And some of it can just be simply like with supply chains. It's like, okay, hey, you just called me and I know you need an order for this, or you're going to cancel that. Just send the standard template like we always do, and then just have a way to verify that that's that email. Now, there's another thing that I like to do on this is generate for all the partners in your supply chain. Basically, it's like the mathematical list of all the fake domains that could look like them, but it isn't them. And just go ahead and block them. So that way, if somebody registers a fake domain to send you an invoice, it won't even get into your email system, much less the accounting team to pay. So there are things we can do in advance to prepare for these things. Again, every business is different. You need to think about what they are, and this needs to be on your roadmap for incident response and, just dealing with things and education. It needs to be part of your security awareness as well. Another thing is your threat intelligence teams need to be tracking that. A lot of threat intelligence teams can get, for lack of a better phrase, lazy and they get so obsessed with indicators of compromise that they're not necessarily looking at what happened to our 5 competitors that just got ransomware in a different way. But like if these kind of voice cloning attacks come up, they're probably not going to hit your radar if all you're looking at is indicator of compromise feeds. So we need to pay attention to what other attacks are going on that are outside of the traditional space that include voice cloning attacks, deep fake attacks, stuff like that. We need to be prepping our executives, possibly prepping our board to know that these are happening. And this needs to be part of our normal business operations. And again, making sure that your staff are educated on these things. So anyway, that was the quick thing. I'm a little over time, and I have not seen anything in the chat because my screen's been entirely full. But this is a link to get the slides, which I will post in 30 minutes or so. And definitely let me know if you have any questions. I will try to look at the chat now. I don't know what all's in there.
Trey?
Yeah.
I don't think that many questions have come up in the chat, but I do have a question.
Sure.
You talked about biometrics not being a primary password and to use something that's private. But these days, what is private, in your opinion? How do if you want that second or third level of authentication, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, it could be like in the example of the smiling. I mean, if you were saying something that would be like a code phrase or something like that, that could be better. But realistically, everything with biometrics should be your username, not your password.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
password needs to be secret. It needs to be something that's in your head and not publicly available at all. So biometrics get into some other weird problems. Obviously they've had things where people took gelatin samples and basically printed out a version of somebody else's thumbprint,
yeah.
and then measurements of hands. The ones that do that for data centers, those can be done from photos. So people are figuring out, like, if you get a really high quality photo of this guy, you'll get his, palm print or whatever it is. A lot of these things are happening now, but the biggest thing is just knowing that we really shouldn't be using public information as the secret part of that process. It's totally good. Like, I don't have a problem with if your ATM, when you walk up to the screen, it takes a picture of you, says, "Hi, Trey, please enter your password." I think that would actually just speed things up. And there's methods where you could use behavior like that to speed processes up, but not using it necessarily as a secret. Hopefully that answers that question. But like with voice prints, you do not want it to be left to just the voice.
I agree with you. And I also have found that over the last 20 years, biometrics have evolved, but people think that they are passwords still, and it just drives me crazy. And
that's why that slide where I specified it's something you privately have and something you privately, know. I think that we really need to communicate that back out to the world, that like we really need to think that these are not, the picture of your face is not at all private anymore.
Nor is the amount of money you pay for your mortgage every month, which
right.
One place I know used for a number of years.
The amount of OSINT on people is insane. And a lot of it gets reflected back to you on these horrible websites where you Google somebody's name and like the 15th link is, you want to hear about his criminal record and all these other things. And like, those companies actually have a lot of data. They'll show you a little bit of it. They're like, oh, he was born here and lived in these 5 addresses.
And some of them are really local to us too.
Yeah. And a lot of them, yes, that's true too. Yes. But yeah, there's an amazing amount of data out there. And a lot of it, there's an amazing amount of data for sale. A lot of these advertising firms, and there's companies that do, I forget what they're called, but it's companies that basically evaluate every human on the earth's political beliefs on a spectrum of these 500 things, so that like, this is how this person votes on guns, or this is how that person votes on whatever topic it is. They sell that data. And you can get, like, for your entire street, who on every single house has what belief and stuff like that. And it's kind of horrifying when you look into it. Now, those things are used for campaign management to say, like, we only want to spend so much money on a billboard. Where do we place the billboard? But those types of data collection are huge. So it's definitely a thing.
And that's why I bring up the question of privacy and, what's really private.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm sure Trey's got answers.
Trey, I got a question. This is Mark Cody.
Hey.
Thanks for the discussion. It was excellent. What my question is there any way, any kind of process or initiative that you've seen where we're trying to kind of certify that the information we see, or the voice we see, or the person we see is actually authentic?
Yeah, and that's very tricky. One of the problems we have is, unless you have, and I even hate to say this, but like state-run, really like strict, public channels for media. The second you go to social media, it's like everything's unregulated, so to speak. So it's very hard for us to know what's real and what's not. The best way to combat that in some sense is if you were a YouTuber or something like that, is just to be super strict about only using that one platform and posting in a specific way, so that if a video popped up somewhere else that never was in that line of things, there's a little bit more deniability. But ultimately the problem ends up becoming is a lot of these deepfake videos are videos taken out of context So it's not something that would be typical of your YouTube channel because it's suddenly you having sex with whatever, 5 people or whatever it is. And the context shift on that makes it where it doesn't matter where they post it. And unfortunately, that breaks a lot of the, if you were to rigidly stay in one, only post in one channel, that, it breaks that entirely. There's not a good solution. And again, that's why there's an $85 million thing is we really, really want, ways to do this. Now, I will say that like from social media standpoint, you kind of get back into this digital signature aspect is like, can we digitally sign all of our, videos and stuff like that? And I think that in some sense, we might create a social media thing that did that.
Yeah, I think of, kind of like a certificate or DocuSign, something like that.
Yeah. If there was some PKI to digitally sign or even just create a hash of your videos. But again, the problem with, the really bad video that they're going to extort you for, the only way to handle that is through deep forensics. There are some, and I'll go ahead and mention this, there are actually some interesting, if you look into photograph forensics, which is a little different than video forensics. With photograph forensics, it's a really common thing is to just go to what's called the gamma channel of colors. And it's basically not the colors that we're used to seeing, but it's like these subtle images. And what'll end up happening is there might be a smooth rainbow of the gamma colors and they go across your face perfectly. But in a photoshopped image, they're wildly different. And so the pattern for that will be completely different than the rest of the room. You can apply some of those same techniques to videos to prove that like, yeah, this wasn't that video. The big problem is if you're dealing with the nation state actors, they can actually correct for that. And so they can make it where even if you did that, it would even be believable then. So there's no easy solution. One of the places to look, and this is just FYI, right now, one of the biggest places where video fakes fail is around these ears. And so if you're watching any kind of video and you're wondering whether it's fake, look at around the ears, because apparently that's the part where these algorithms goof up the most. Or your ear will change during the middle of the video and be a different shape. So that's the tip for right now. But it's just a matter of time till software compensates for that, and then the ears get done correctly.
Yeah, no, that's great information, and I think it's going to be a bigger and bigger challenge. Definitely moving forward.
Yeah, I wish I had a better solution, and again, this is, $1 million question. I do think that for certain communication, so like if your board sends out an actual message, you may want to do PKI on that, like a message or a public PR communication that's of a certain high value because, maybe you're announcing your quarterly results and that's going to impact the market by billions of dollars or whatever. You might want to go through a formal authentication process for those types of videos. I think that would be wise. But again, people can put out fake videos of like, hey, we've rigged the stock, or the company's failing and we got to get out of here, those kind of things. So anyway, lots of different problems with this. So I don't have all the solutions. I do know that if we start collecting data a bit better, it's going to make it a lot easier for us down the road. And we can go ahead and start tackling some of these, the problems with like the virtual or synthetic identities. So we can actually do some defenses against those now. The catch is the smaller companies need to kind of be on board with this, and it not just be Twitter and Facebook and Google and Microsoft that are fighting and having to deal with these problems. We need to start paying attention to this across the industry. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for responding.
Yeah. Hopefully I'll have an update in a year or two. And I was just gonna say, hopefully I'll have an update in a year or two of some cool solutions to this, but
yeah,
right now it's a problem. So.
Well, thank you, Trey, for a really informative and interesting talk today. I think everybody is appreciative of it.
Yeah, thanks. And if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to send me an email, trey@verificationlabs.com. Absolutely love answering, especially hard, weird security questions. And it doesn't have to be about this. I talk about hundreds of different things. There's also a website where you can see a listing of my talks and stuff like that. But it's fun stuff for me. So I actually really enjoy good questions. So.